Meet Amy. She carries a hidden wound, a secret struggle that not many can see from the surface. On the surface, she may appear fine, but deep within, she's wrestling with a silent pain, a wound that impacts her life in many more ways than she's able to express. Today, we're inviting you to step into Amy's shoes to understand the profound links between trauma, mental health, and addiction, and how these invisible battles are more common than you might think. We will take a journey together to unveil the hidden wounds that affect countless individuals just like Amy. Trauma is described to be any profound and terrible event that may occur in an individual's life. What we consider traumatic events such as a car accident are not universal in how they affect people. For example, one individual may have no psychological impact, while another person's life could be completely altered. While there are many different subtypes of trauma, in this video we'll be talking about interpersonal, developmental, complex trauma, and post-traumatic stress disorder. Interpersonal trauma can be characterized by the trauma inflicted by a person close to the affected individual. For example, a family member or a spouse. Child neglect and child abuse would fall under this category. Developmental trauma is characterized by frequent and complex exposure to life-threatening events that take place during delicate stages of an infant or child's development, damage interpersonal bonds, jeopardize a person's security and safety procedures, modifies basic abilities for emotional, behavioral, and cognitive control, and frequently plays a role in the emergence of PTSD in adults. For complex trauma, it refers to trauma that escalates over time. For example, domestic violence that starts verbal, then financial, and then physical is an escalation of trauma. PTSD, unlike the other traumas discussed, does not have to involve direct relationships with other people. For example, those surviving a natural disaster or war could potentially have PTSD. There are 4 basic categories of PTSD symptoms: trauma, reliving traumatic experiences, avoidance behavior, being hyper-aware of the environment for danger. We are now going to take a journey to understand how trauma affects mental health. To demonstrate this, let's talk about Amy's story as she battles complex issues like PTSD, anxiety, and depression as a result of the trauma she went through. First, let's delve into the world of post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. Picture PTSD as a car alarm that's not just faulty, but hypersensitive. It's meant to warn us of danger, but in Amy's case, it goes off at the slightest touch, or even without any real threat. This is similar to what Amy feels after a traumatic childhood event that she had. Her body's stress response, particularly the adrenaline rush, is like this overactive alarm. It's constantly on high alert, blaring warning, even in everyday situations where there's no real danger. The heightened state can be exhausting. Imagine trying to go about your day with the car alarm constantly going off in the background. It's distracting, it's draining, and it makes it hard to focus on anything else. That's what living with PTSD can be like. Small, everyday occurrences like a loud noise or certain smells can trigger this alarm for Amy, sending her back to the traumatic moments from her childhood. It's important to note the prevalence of this issue that Amy goes through in her day-to-day life. Research has shown that 1 in 3 people in severe traumatic situations develop PTSD. Amy's story helps us understand this better, as it's not about weakness or strength, it's about how different bodies and minds react to extreme stress. And for those like Amy who develop PTSD, it's crucial to recognize their struggles and provide the support they need. Unfortunately, on top of PTSD, Amy's story takes us into the world of anxiety. To understand anxiety in Amy's life, let's compare it to constantly ringing phone with no caller ID. Just like an unexpected phone ring can startle you, anxiety sends sudden, unexplained signals of fear and worry to Amy. This reaction is a remnant of her traumatic childhood experience, which has turned her mind to be on constant alert, much like a phone that rings at the slightest hint of the call. This persistent state of alertness in Amy is not just a personal anecdote. It's reflected in broader research, such as a pivotal 2020 study involving 1,800 individuals. This study uncovered a significant trend. Those who reported experiencing trauma during their childhood were far more likely to encounter anxiety later in life. It's as if their psychological phone rings off the hook at the slightest irritation, or even without any clear reason. Tragically, Amy's mental health challenges don't end with anxiety and PTSD. She also faces the heavy burden of depression. Picture depression like wearing a pair of really dark sunglasses. Everything looks dimmer and less colorful. For Amy, these sunglasses are a result of really tough things she's been through, much like what happens to soldiers coming back from war or people who've survived big disasters. In Amy's life, this means she often feels down, like she's lost her spark. Things that she used to enjoy don't seem fun anymore. Hanging out with her friends or even watching her favorite TV shows don't bring her the same joy. This constant feeling of sadness that Amy has isn't just about having a single bad day. It's like carrying a heavy weight all the time. Even getting out of bed or doing simple actions can feel like a big task. Now, let's turn to the link between trauma and addiction. This is important as it sheds light on the common but often misunderstood consequence of trauma. Imagine trauma as a deep wound. Just like a physical wound hurts and needs treatment, emotional wounds from trauma also need healing. Unfortunately, some people turn to substances like alcohol or opioids in an attempt to self-medicate to numb the pain of their emotional wounds. This can start a dangerous cycle where the temporary relief from substances leads to an increased reliance on them, ultimately leading to an addiction. Take Amy's story, for example. Struggling with the emotional turmoil from her past trauma, she might find temporary solace in alcohol, but this relief is short-lived and comes with a high price. Regular and excessive drinking can cause serious damage to the body, particularly to the liver, a vital organ. This is just one example of how substance abuse, while initially a coping mechanism, can lead to severe physical health problems. But the impact of trauma-related addiction isn't just physical. It deeply affects personal relationships too. Amy, dealing with the addiction, might experience intense mood swings, bursts of anger, or extreme emotional reactions. These behaviors can put a strain on her relationship with family, friends, and colleagues. Each individual and each trauma is highly personalized. A clinical or a team of mental health professionals would need to psychologically assess the individual to provide correct care. Here are a few examples of treatments and interventions. Individual and family counseling that is tailored to improve interpersonal communication, attachment security, emotional regulation, and co-regulation between parent and a child or those in romantic relationships. Trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy teaches coping mechanisms that help manage recurring trauma, such as identifying painful reactions, being aware of them, and is more adept at handling reminders of past trauma. Cognitive processing therapy consists of therapy sessions focusing on trauma memories with an emphasis on lowering distress through written exposure and cognitive restructuring. Reducing stigma around mental health is important for creating an inclusive and safe environment for people of all ages, ethnicities, and sexual orientations. Trauma, anxiety, and depression can negatively affect anyone, so it is important that any stigma surrounding mental health is reduced and seeking help is encouraged. Fear or misunderstanding surrounding mental health can cause people to hold prejudiced beliefs against people dealing with mental health issues and addiction. Stigma can cause feeling of shame and doubt in individuals that require proper help and support to return to their normal lives. Stigma creates barriers that individuals are scared to overcome in order to receive diagnoses and treatment. These barriers must be dismantled. Seeking support for mental health and addiction is a sign of strength, not weakness. If you or someone you know needs support, here are some resources that can help. Early intervention is crucial and can be life-saving. Remember, you're not alone and help is always available. Let's foster a compassionate, understanding community where mental health is prioritized and seeking help is a sign of resilience. Together, we can make this difference.